appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us. I am Tracy Lambright, the Deputy Finance Director here at Volunteer Florida, and we're going to talk today about the CERT Periodic Expenditure Report, otherwise known as the PER. You'll probably also hear it referred to as the reimbursement invoice and the PER. So all the same information. So we've got a lot to cover for you today. I hope you will find this helpful in starting your grants. I know Robin has gotten the second round of contracts and that out, so making sure that you guys are staying on top of that. But we'll go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, please go ahead and use the chat, and we will periodically check that and answer those questions as we can. Anything that we don't get answered today will also be in an FAQ that will also be posted with this presentation, hopefully by the end of the week for you. All right. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So today, session objectives. So we want to talk about your grant and your contract requirements, making sure that everybody understands and knows what those requirements are. Your contract compliance, what is allowable and unallowable, understanding what the match requirement is, understanding again that PER worksheet, the required supporting documentation, the budget revision process, and then we will also go through how to submit the quarterly invoices using our online invoice submission portal called Laserfish. All right, so this contract has begun effective July 1st, 2026 and ends on May 31st, 2027. Until your contracts have been signed, you cannot start making expenditures or requesting reimbursement. However, the contract did start on July 1. So once your contracts are signed, then you will be eligible to begin assessing costs towards the grant. All required documentation must also be on file with us before any type of reimbursements can begin. So that documentation, again, would be from those emails Robin has sent out recently regarding your signed contract, your W-9s, making sure that you're submitting that on the 2024 version of the W-9 form. The vendor EFT authorization form that should have also been provided to you. There is an approved Volunteer Florida form, and that is required to be completed and filled out and sent in to us for you to receive electronic payments. We also need a copy of your most recent audited financial statements. Of course, the approved budget, which everybody at this point does have an approved budget, and those have been provided to you. They will also be provided to you as part of your contract package. They will be one of your attachments. And then any other required documentation per your contract agreement. Sorry, this is really thanks. All right, so this contract is what we call a cost reimbursement contract. Several of you are aware and are returning grantees, so you understand what this concept is. But this means that you can only charge costs to the grant from your approved budget that have been already paid for by the organization. And we will go into that some more, and I have some examples as well. So grantees are going to be required to submit quarterly invoices, which you will request reimbursement for any of the expenditures you paid for within that quarter, as well as submitting any of your match that you have also paid for during that same quarter. So you're going to provide those on a quarterly invoice to request reimbursement and report those match expenditures. Grant funds will only be provided for the approved and documented expenditures that you have incurred during that reporting period. So here are some examples on cost reimbursement. So the scenario is that you're creating your first quarter invoice, which will be July, August, and September. And you want to know if you can request reimbursement for these expenditures under the cost reimbursement definition. I'm going to say that in these examples, we're going to assume that they are all in your approved budget. You will hear that from me a lot throughout this presentation, especially when we get to the allowable cost section. So allowable costs are usually the number one thing I'm going to say is must be in your approved budget. So let's assume all of these in your approved budget. We're going to go through these examples. And determine whether or not, based under the cost reimbursement definition, if these can be claimed on your first quarter invoice. So the number one is background check costs that you've incurred as of July 1, 2026. You paid for it with a check on July 25th, 2026, and that check cleared your bank on August 1st, 2026. So this expenditure would be yes. Yes, you would be able to claim this. One, it was purchased within the period of performance, which is that July 1 to May 31 time period. It was paid by check during that period, and the check also cleared your bank during that same period. So background check costs would be allowable to be claimed on your first quarter invoice. Approved equipment purchased on September 1, 26, paid for on September 1, 26 by a credit card, and you paid the credit card statement on October 25th. So in this example, because the final payment was made to the credit card company for that purchase on October 25th, that approved equipment that was purchased would not be allowable to claim on your first quarter invoice because that final payment was not made until October, which falls within quarter two. So whatever equipment that was purchased on September 1, but that was not paid for until the 25th of October would have to be claimed on a quarter two invoice. All right, the next one, training certification costs that were incurred on August 15th. Paid by check on September 10th, and that check cleared your bank on September 30th. So in this example, yes, because it was incurred during the period, and it was also that final check cleared the account on September 30th, which was within that quarter one time period, then yes, this expense would be eligible to be claimed on a quarter one invoice. Right, next we have salary that was paid on July 2nd for the period of June 15th to June 28th, 2026. So because this salary was paid on June 2nd, typically something paid within the month of, or July 2nd, but typically something paid within that quarter would be allowable. However, because the salary being paid on July 2nd is for a time period that was prior to the start of the grant. So that period was June 15th to June 28th. This would not be an eligible expense to claim to the grant at all because the time was worked prior to the start of the contract. So this would not be claimed at all. All right, so next, volunteer hours that were served and recorded for the period of September 1 through December 31st, 2026. So for this one, volunteer hours are an unallowable expense. Most of you are aware of that. They are allowable to be used as match on the grant. However, only the volunteer hours served within quarter one, which would be July, August, or September, would be allowable to be claimed on quarter one. So any volunteer hours served in September, September 1 to September 30th, would be eligible for a quarter one invoice. A quarter two invoice would then be October, November, December, and that's where the remaining portion of these volunteer hours could be claimed on your quarter two invoice. All right, and then the last example, training registration fees paid by credit card on July 15th. Credit card statement was paid on September 1st, and they paid that by check, and then that check cleared the bank on October 2nd. So again, this is another one of those credit card payments. Because the check for the final payment made to the credit card company did not clear the bank until October 2nd, the expenditure, the training registration fees would not be able to be claimed until the quarter two invoice because again, that payment was made on October 2nd. So I hope these examples were helpful to you in helping you determine whether or not an expenditure is able to be claimed on an invoice and which invoice it can be claimed on based on the date of payment. All right, so contract compliance. We all know that contract compliance will help ensure that you do not have paybacks, that you're not charging for unallowable costs. It also helps ensure that there are no delays in processing your reimbursement requests or making you forfeit any payments. Also would allow you the ability to fully expend and match your grants. So make sure that you are, and anyone that is involved with managing this contract has a chance to read through the contract and being familiar with all the provisions, the required reporting, and documentation information, making sure to pay attention to your due dates, and the required trainings and reporting, making sure that you're also submitting timely and complete invoices by the due dates, making sure that you're also, again, including both reimbursable and match expenditures on those invoices, and making sure that everyone involved is also familiar with the contract attachments or exhibits. So that's going to be all of your forms. It's going to have your periodic expenditure report form. It's going to have a copy of your budget. It's going to have a copy of your budget revision request form, which we're going to talk about later in the presentation as well. So make sure that everyone who has a hand in overseeing this grant has a chance to read through those and familiarize themselves with those to help manage this grant properly. So important dates to remember, quarterly invoices are going to be due by the 15th of the month following the end of each quarter. They must include, again, that PER, periodic expenditure report form, and all required supporting documentation for both your reimbursable and your match expenditures. I've included those dates, those due dates in this slide. So your July, August, and September, which is considered your quarter one invoice, that is going to be due October 15th. Quarter two is due by January 15th. Quarter three by April 15th, and then the last quarter due by June the 15th. This grant ends May 31st, so June the 15th would be that quarter four. As you will note, a final invoice can also be submitted by June the 30th. And that final invoice would be for things that were not eligible to be claimed on that quarter four invoice, or for any other expenditures that may have been disallowed from a prior submission, maybe because documentation wasn't correct, or you weren't able to document it as required. So that final invoice, so it's kind of like the fifth invoice, but it does give you an extra 15 days after that to submit for anything. Most of the time we see this for things like salary. I know a lot of you don't have salary dollars, but we see this a lot where salary was paid after the end of that quarter four, but it was still eligible to be claimed on the grant, so they could use that final invoice to submit that. So again, that could also go for other expenditures or trainings or things like that as well. And just note that no late final submissions will be accepted. So per the contract, we do not accept any late final submissions. That June 30th, the deadline is a hard deadline for any final invoices. And that's only because of our deadlines with the Division of Emergency Management as well. So we've got to make sure that we have the time in between there to provide all the final reporting to them as well. So just make sure that everyone involved is aware and understands when these due dates are and when those invoices need to come in. If for some reason you won't be submitting one of the quarterly invoices, if you could please, and you'll have contact information at the end for both Nicholas Revel. Most of you have worked with him. He's our financial analyst too, that'll be overseeing the grant. So you can write him an email. You can send Robin an email as your program manager, or send me an email as well, letting us know whether or not you'll be submitting an invoice. So if you're not going to have a quarter one, send us a quick invoice letting us know, hey, we don't have any expenditures, we're not going to submit. That way we can note that, so that we don't note that you did not submit and did not communicate with us. Anytime that you need an extension or you're not sure that you'll be able to make that date, please reach out to us, communicate with us, so that we can help you and hopefully be able to provide you with an extension to get that information into us timely so that we can get it processed and get those funds out to you. Some other requirements in the contract is that grantees are required to expend and request reimbursement for at least 50% of your grant funds no later than the end of the third quarter, which is March 31st, and that should be 2027, so I apologize for that. So no later than March 31st. Grantees are also required to submit at least one PER by quarter three. So if you're unable to do a quarter one or quarter two, it is a requirement that you at least submit by quarter three. If you don't, you could be in danger for losing the funding. All documentation pertaining to this grant is required to be retained. So make sure that you have records retention policies and procedures, and make sure that you are holding any documentation for this grant for the 5 state fiscal years after all reporting requirements have been met and final payments have been received. All right, so moving over to allowable costs. Costs eligible for reimbursement. And here we go. Number one, all costs must be in your approved budget. So in your approved budget, if you have budgeted for, let's say, example, CERT registration fees, you are allowed to claim CERT registration fees on your budget. If you did not include transportation to the CERT conference, that is not going to be an expenditure that you're going to be eligible to claim on the grant because it is not in your approved budget. So most of you know that you've worked with me in doing the budgets this year, and how detailed those expenditures have to be so that we could find out whether or not they were allowable on the grant. So your budgets are very detailed about what expenses are allowable to be claimed. If you find throughout the grant year that you're going to need something other than what is in your original approved budget. Again, I talked about doing a budget revision, and then we'll talk about that here shortly in the presentation, but that would be allowed. And that would be a way for you to be able to expense those items, but they must first be in your approved budget. All costs must also be related to the following, which are the budget categories within that budget. Your planning section, the organization section, training, exercise, equipment, and then management and admin. Again, management and admin cannot exceed 5% of the grant, and again, must have already been in your approved budget. Unallowable costs are costs that are not in your approved budget. Again, that example I talked about. If you did not put transportation to training, then you cannot claim transportation for training. Any type of food or beverages, again, food and beverages were not allowable on the grant. However, there are some detailed ways that it could possibly be allowable. Again, DEM would have to provide us with an approval on that, and that would have to occur 25 days before. Again, it would have to be in your allowable budget and then also be approved prior to being allowable. Any per diem claimed over the state of Florida rate at more than $36 per day. Any mileage claimed over the state of Florida rate of 0.445 cents per mile. Trainings that do not directly relate to the scope of your program and benefit the CERT program. Taxes of any kind, and then volunteer hours claimed over the Florida Independent Sector rate of $34.88 per hour. So right now that is the current rate. Typically every year in April, those rates do increase. Once we do receive documentation of the updated rate, we will let you know that. So that will most likely be during the grant year. So if that occurs again next year and it does increase or decrease, we will let you know what that is, and you'll be able to claim using the new rate moving forward. All right, and then let's talk about travel real quick. There were a couple of you that had some travel in your budget. Again, making sure state of Florida's maximum mileage rate is 0.445 cents per mile. If your organization pays less than this, then that's what you would be required to claim on the grant, but you cannot exceed the 0.445 cents per mile. There is no reimbursement for both mileage and gas. You get reimbursement for one or the other. Lodging, which is also a state of Florida maximum, cannot exceed $225 per night. So make sure you're securing lodging that does not exceed that to be able to claim that on the grant as long as it's in your approved budget. And then again, meals. Meals cannot exceed your state of Florida per diem rates of $36 per day. This slide breaks that out for you, which is breakfast is $6, lunch is $11, and dinner is $19. The time periods of eligibility are also listed. So be able to claim breakfast for the $6, you must leave for travel before 6 a.m. And then that travel must extend beyond 8 a.m. To be able to claim lunch, you must leave before noon and travel beyond 2 p.m. And for dinner, you must travel before 6 p.m. and go beyond 8 p.m. All right, we mentioned this earlier. So match is required on the grant. We all know that. We've budgeted for that. Match is 100% requirement, so dollar for dollar. So if you have a $5,000 grant, then you'll be required to match at $5,000. Again, it can be cash or in kind. So cash, of course, that's going to be expenditures that you're using other funding to cover for the CERT grant. In kind are things like volunteer hours, things that you're not using cash to pay for, but being able to use those hours as a match on the grant. So in kind would be things like volunteer hours. They could be donations. They could be like a donation of equipment. Say somebody ended up donating CERT backpacks to your program. Those would be able, our donation, so those would be considered in kind because no cash took place there. So those could be in-kind donations and they would be valued at what the typical amount to provide those would have been. You can also use state and federal funds to match the grant as long as those funders are aware and that they have approved you to use them. So if you're using state or federal funds and you're using those funds to purchase things within your approved budget to match this grant, as long as those funders have allowed you to do so, you may do that. We may or we will require you to provide documentation of that if that is the case. If you are using state or federal funding, we would want to see a letter from that funder allowing you to use those type of funds to match the grant. And again, volunteer hours can be matched. Again, the contract, I apologize, the contract period was not updated. So the contract period for this year is again July 1, 2026 through May 31st, 2027. Hours for volunteer hours must also be documented. You'll see that in our supporting documentation later. There is a sample document that can be used, but they must be reported on those quarterly invoices, and the form must provide the name of the volunteer, the dates, and the times the volunteer hours were served, should be certified with a signature, and should also note what type of volunteer work was being done and how that related to the CERT program. And again, $34.88 per hour. Match must be met before you will receive all funds reimbursed to you. So the statement that I made about claiming those match expenditures on your quarterly invoices, please do not wait to the end of the grant or you will not receive your funding. So after about 6 months in, we want to make sure that a grantee is expending and matching the grant funds at at the same rate. So if your grant is $5,000, we're going to expect you to match $5,000. So if you've, in quarter one spent the $5,000, then by quarter two, we're going to want to see that you have matched that $5,000. We want to be able to ensure that match is met because it has to be met. Again, noting the same documentation that you're going to provide to us for the reimbursable expenses is the same documentation that you will provide for your match expenditures. And again, do not wait till the end of the contract year because we won't be able to determine whether you're going to meet match. So we will hold those funds and not reimburse them until we're able to verify the reported match. If you don't meet the required match for the funds expended, the allowable grant funds will be adjusted and decreased. You'll only receive funds equal to the match funds you've provided. So the example I put here is if you have a $5,000 grant and you have a $5,000 required match, if you only provide documentation for $4,652 and match expenditures, then that is the maximum amount of funds that you would be able to receive from the grant, because it is a dollar for dollar grant. So whatever you match is the amount of federal funding or state funding that you will receive from the grant. All right, so this here is a copy of the periodic expenditure report. Again, reimbursement invoice, monthly invoice, PER or PER. It is all referred to that. This is going to be submitted with each quarterly invoice, and it will also be one of the attachments in your contract package. It's an Excel document, so it does have formulas built in, so it will calculate your totals for you. You will include your information for reimbursable expenditures under the column that says CERT/Citizen Corps. Any match expenditures that you're reporting will go in the match column. Those will not be reimbursed. Those are just your reporting of match for the grant. We will reimburse only the CERT/Citizen Corps columns. You want to include as much detail on this form for whatever you're claiming for reimbursement within that quarter. You want to make sure the lead applicant and the invoice dates are also filled out at the top of the form. Now, the invoice dates should be based on your quarter. So for the first quarter one invoice, this PER would have invoice date starting July 1, 2026 and go to September 30th, 2026. Wait, July, August, yeah, September 30th. Sorry about that. At the bottom, you'll see highlighted in yellow, it'll say approved by and the date sent to Volunteer Florida. That is where you need to sign. Sign and date this before it is submitted. If that is not done, it will be sent back to you. So we want to make sure that you're doing that up front. With that quarter invoice, you will include this form along with all of your supporting documentation, and we're about to go through some of what that will look like. All of this would be uploaded into one PDF form and then uploaded to our invoice submission portal, which we'll talk about here shortly as well. All right, so each section has sample documentation that is required. Again, most of it's going to be the same. Under the planning section, depending on what you budgeted in your planning section, could include things like copies of your completed plan, contracts or agreements with any consultants or subcontractors. If you have salary, or you'll be required to provide timesheets. So make sure that you're understanding that timesheets will be required. I know there are several organizations that do not require timesheets, especially for salaried employees. So if you're an organization that does this, and you do have some type of salary dollars that you're going to be charging to the grant, a timesheet will be required. So timesheets will also need to note your specific CERT grant activities. Those will need to be signed and dated by both the employee and the supervisor. Note each pay period and include the pay period dates on it. Proof of payment for that's going to include a pay stub, a payroll journal, some type of earning statement that notes the same payroll dates, pay period dates, have a paid date on it. And then you must also provide documentation that the payroll was paid. So most of the time, this is a bank statement showing the payroll, being paid through your bank account. If you have things that you're purchasing, like supplies, invoices, itemized receipts, some type of support of the expense, as well as a proof of payment. Proof of payments can come in many different ways. So if you pay by check, the proper proof of payment will be a copy of the canceled check, showing it clearing the bank account. If you pay by credit card, which I talked about in several of the examples, if you pay by credit card, you need a copy of your invoice or itemized receipt noting what was purchased. You will also need a copy of the credit card statement that shows the charge. And then you need a proof of payment showing the credit card statement was paid. So I always use this example. So if you go to Best Buy and you buy yourself a laptop, you've paid Best Buy, and Best Buy has received their money, but now you also still owe the credit card company for that purchase. So that is why when using a credit card, we use the date the credit card statement was paid, because that's when you've actually paid for whatever it was that you purchased. In this case, in my example, a laptop. So keep that in mind if you're going to be using credit card statements or credit cards to purchase any of your supplies or in your approved budget, you're going to want to make sure that you're timely paying those credit card statements so that you can get those, reimbursed timely. All right, organization, same thing here. Most of the time, it's either supplies or it's some type of salary. So again, salary timesheets. I cannot reiterate how much. We also have some sample timesheets that we can send to you if you do not use a timesheet. We can send a sample to you. You can feel free to use that. It will include all of the requirements that I mentioned before: the name, the title, the pay period dates, it'll have lines where you can report or allocate the hours that were worked specifically on the CERT grant, and then your other hours that were worked within that period to other areas that you're allocating to. It'll have signatures, it'll have the certification statement, the dates. So, if you do not have a timesheet system or do not use timesheets and you would like for that, we can make sure that we supply that for you as well. And again, same type of proof of payments. Make sure also that all documentation is clearly visible. And you can highlight, you can underline, you can circle, just whatever you need to do to help us and aid us in our review would be most helpful. All right, training section. Again, some of the same information. If you are going to be attending a training, then we're going to require certificates, sign-in sheets, certified rosters, and agendas, of course. If you're conducting a training, again, we'll need sign-in sheets, rosters, and copies of your course material, and of course, an agenda. Any type of procurement support could be for some type of trainings. And again, the whole invoices, itemized receipts, proof of payments, it's all the same. Has to be when the credit card statement was paid. If it was a check, it has to be when that check cleared your account, and then documentation of that is required. This is again required for all reimbursable expenditures and all match expenditures. Okay, moving on to exercise, same type of thing. If you're conducting an exercise, the same type of information. Sign-in sheets, agendas, certificates, and then of course proof of payments for whatever. If you paid a trainer to train, we're going to need a contract for what that training was, what the contract amount was, and then proof that that payment was paid. All right, same thing for equipment. Again, in your budgets, you notice you provided an AEL reference number, so that should be included on your PER form. Again, invoices, itemized receipts, making sure when you're providing those receipts that they are itemized. They show everything that was purchased. Even if there were things purchased that were not being charged to the grant, we want to see, if you paid $500 for supplies, we're going to want to see a receipt or an invoice for $500 worth of supplies. And again, you can highlight, you can circle, you can provide any type of notes or information to us when submitting that information to help us determine what was allowable on the grant. And we want to see that the proof of payment matches that invoice or receipt that you've provided. Also must be clearly visible. So if it's not very clearly visible when you've printed it or you've provided it or scanned it in, most likely by the time you scan it and send it to us again, we're not going to be able to read it. So make sure that when you're uploading the documentation that you're taking a look through it and that you're able to identify the information on that submission as well. If you can't see it, then most likely we're not going to be able to see it. And that would just slow things down if we got to reach back out to you because your PER form isn't filled out, or we can't read documentation or determine, what supplies are being charged to the grant based on what was provided. So we need everybody's eyes, when making these submissions, making sure you've got all the correct information, you're claiming the correct expenditures based on your approved budget, and that you're providing the comprehensive documentation that's required for each of them. All right, and then management and admin costs, those are going to be still, even though they're only up to 5% of your budget, you still have to provide supporting documentation for what those management and admin costs are. Now, sometimes it's not salary, sometimes it is salary. It just depends, on what that is. Again, if it is salaries, it's timesheets and pay stubs. If it's a contractor to, handle the invoice submissions on a quarterly basis, it's some type of contract, or if it is an employee, it's a timesheet noting how many hours they put towards it and the portion of salary dollars from the time from the pay period that's being allocated to the grant. And you again would provide some type of payroll, pay stub, payroll journal to support that. Again, if you do not have management administration in your current budget, then that would not be allowable to be claimed on the grant. All right, so moving forward, these are just some sample documents to kind of show you what I was talking about. So this is our sample timesheet. You'll note that it's got the employee's name and title, their company name, their pay period start and end dates, the dates on the timesheet match. You can see that they allocated their time between CERT and administration. So it's noting what days and what hours were worked towards CERT and which days and what hours were worked towards administration to show that full 80-hour pay period and the total amount of hours that are being allocated to the CERT program. You see that it has the certification statement, and it also has the employee's signatures and dates. These are all pieces that we are looking at when we see a timesheet. So even if you do have your own timesheet system, making sure that your timesheet that you will provide to us provides all of those things that I just went through. That we will need to see. If your timesheet does not have that, then you may want to consider using our sample. And then this is just a sample pay stub. So again, this is going to note their name. It's going to note the pay period dates that match the dates on the timesheet. It notes the pay date because, of course, when we look at this to find out whether it's eligible to be claimed on the quarterly invoice that it was submitted on, we're going to be looking at that pay date. It notes the amount paid, that member, it shows the FICA and the taxes withheld. And then you would back this up also with like a bank statement showing where payroll went through your account. This is for anybody that may have used benefits on their grant. Again, this was like a Florida Blue invoice for health insurance. So this is, if you did have that, this is what we would be looking for to document that. It's showing the amount that is due. It's showing who is covered, how much is being paid for each person being covered. And then this is a check. You'll be required again to provide proof the check cleared the bank account. So you would want to provide a copy of the check, or you want to just provide a copy of the clear check from your bank statement showing that it has cleared your account. This is for emergency kits that were ordered. So this is just a sample of that that's showing the grand total was on a debit card. So a debit card is a little bit different than a credit card. So debit cards go directly through your bank account, correct? So the proof of payment documentation for that would be just a copy of your bank statement showing that charge coming through. If that was on a credit card, then of course you would need to provide a credit card statement along with this invoice. And then also a copy, proof of payment for that credit card statement. But note this receipt here. It notes exactly what was paid for, how much was ordered, and the total cost. This right here is just a sample travel for any of you that may have put travel. This is the state of Florida travel reimbursement form. So a lot of you may already be using this. It is a great form. It's very comprehensive, includes everything that we're looking for to document travel. So I put an example of what that should look like for you and how to calculate meals based on your hours of departure or return. It's also, if you look in the notes section, so if you go to a training and they're providing meals, you're going to note those meals were provided, and you will not be allowed to or eligible to be reimbursed for those meals. details. So this just kind of shows you exactly. Volunteer Florida uses a P card, so we fill in P card sections for anything that we use to pay with P card. So if you're an organization that's using, your organization's credit card to pay for expenditures, those would be reported under the purchasing card section. And then, of course, you would provide the receipts for those. And then, of course, you would also provide a copy of a credit card statement and then proof the credit card statement was paid. Once you received all of that information and can supply that, you would submit that on your quarterly invoice with all of that documentation to request reimbursement for those expenditures. This right here is a sample volunteer hour documentation form. Again, we can send this out to you as well. If your organization is currently not using something that provides all of this information. So with volunteer hours, they're allowable as long as they are for your CERT program. So if the volunteer work being done does fall in line with your CERT program, then you would use a form like this to document the volunteer's name, their location, the dates, the amount of hours, and then it must also have an authorizing official signature and date on that as well. That is like a certification that you certify the hours. So again, you can use your own documentation for that if you have something that you're currently using. If you're unsure, I'm showing you just some samples, and I'm just kind of letting you know what we're looking for in that documentation. So if you have documentation that you're wanting or intending to use, and you're unsure if it meets our requirements, send it over to us. We'd be happy to look at it and let you know whether or not it would meet the requirements, or if it didn't, what we would need to see if you could go back and find information like that. If not, again, we have several of these sample documentations that we can provide to you for you to use. This is another service record sample document as well. Again, it's got the volunteer name, the signatures, the times in and outs, and the total hours. So that's, again, something we would need to document those volunteer hours if that's what you have placed in your budget to match. All right, moving right along over here to budget revisions. Again, I talked about if you find that during the administration of the grant, you determine that there is something else that you would better serve the program or that you would like to purchase that is not currently in your approved budget, you can request a budget revision. And what that would do is you would let us know where you would want to move funding from to include a new expenditure. You have to fill out the budget revision request form, which will also be another attachment within your contract package. It should be completed, signed and dated, and then sent directly to your program manager, which in this case will be Robin Bridges. And then she will work with finance in making sure that those get reviewed and then hopefully approved. Once a budget revision is approved, then you can begin purchasing of the new the new items that were not currently in your approved budget. In an approved budget or in a budget revision, you cannot do any retroactive costs. So you can't go back and say, hey, we forgot to start claiming this. Can we put it in your budget? You can add it to your budget, but you cannot go back and claim anything prior to that budget revision request date. Again, they must be submitted to your program manager. We typically only allow a maximum of 2 revisions through the contract year. The final revision will be due no later than March 31st. So as you're managing this grant and starting up, making sure that you're reviewing that budget, making sure that it's still in line with your program's needs, and overseeing that and continuing to look over that budget and manage that budget throughout the grant to ensure that if you do identify something that needs to be in there that's not, that you're able to do that within these maximum of 2 budget revisions and no later than March 31st. We typically will give you 5 business days. If we review and we have questions, we'll give you 5 business days to provide us with updates on that. If you do not, then we're gonna close that request out and request that you submit another one. So keep that in mind. So with budget revisions, you'll see this in the contract. We have a thing called the 10% rule. So if you're going to be adding a line or an expense that is not already in your approved budget, you are required to do a budget revision. 10% does not apply in that case. The 10% only applies for something that is already in your approved budget. So let's say training. So say you included training for the CERT conference, and you're going to be paying registration fees, travel, hotel, gas, that type of thing. And let's say you only budgeted $2,500 total for all of those expenditures, and you realize that it's now going to cost like $2,700. So you've expensed the full $2,500, but it's actually going to cost $2,700. Well, we will allow you to go 10% in a line item. So we would allow you to claim that $2,700, but keep in mind, because you went $200 over that line item, you will have to go to underspend $200 in another area. This will not require you to do a budget revision. If that amount, if you only budgeted, say, $2,500 for travel, and you realize it's going to cost your whole $5,000 grant, then we're going to require you to move all of your funding to that section to be able to cover that, because that's going to take you over the 10%. Okay. So again, if you need to add an expense that's not already there, that requires a budget revision. If you already have something in there that costs a little bit more than what you originally budgeted for, it is okay as long as you don't exceed 10% of your grant. We don't require you to do the budget revision. If it is going to exceed the 10% of the grant, then again, a budget revision would be required. Also, don't confuse this. If your grant is $5,000, then your grant will still be $5,000. If your grant is $10,000, then your grant will still be $10,000. Budget revisions do not change the dollar amount of your contract. They just allow you to move funding around within the budget categories to better serve your program, but your amounts will not change. Okay? This information is the same thing I said. It refers to adjustments if they're needed to the already approved budgets. For example, let's say your budget's 20,000 and you say you budgeted 500 in travel, but your travel is 1,200. Since the difference is less than 10%, you would not complete a revision. This does not change your budget amounts in the category. All right, and this right here is that budget revision request form. So this is the form that you would fill out if you did see that you needed to add something to your budget that better served your program that was not already in your approved budget. Again, you're going to fill out the top part of the form, the lead agency program, and the date you've submitted it. You're also going to sign it at the bottom. It's going to be the approved by and the date revision request sent to us. It's going to be your signature and date. All forms must have this information to be complete. To fill out this budget revision request form, the original budget numbers from your original approved budget will be entered in those first three columns. You'll see the CERT, the match, and the total. So under original budget, that's where your original everything will be. In your budget changes column, this is where you're going to include your increases and decreases. So again, with the revision, your dollar amounts are not going to change. They're still going to stay the same. You're just moving funds around to better serve your program. So your increases will equal your decreases, and the budget totals in this section will be 0. And then the revised budget will automatically calculate for you. It'll take into account your original budget and the information you've entered in the budget changes columns, and it'll recalculate a new revised budget for you. Those amounts should also still equal your total amounts in the original budget. Again, they should not change. And then the last column, the justifications and calculations section, that is where you should include your calculations. So just as you did with your approved budgets, you're required to provide a calculation for the amounts and totals in your budget. You will need to provide a justification or information regarding what you're trying to do and what you're trying to add or remove and why, and then a calculation for that amount. Okay, and this slide just walks through exactly what I just talked about. This is just a sample budget. You can see down under the equipment cost section on here and the background checks. So originally, we did not include background check costs in our original budget. So we've added them at $300. In the justification and calculation section, we said we're adding background check costs for new volunteers, $30 each for 100 for $300. So that has shown how we got that calculation and what we're adding. And then if you look down in the equipment cost section, we have removed the CERT banners. So we've determined that instead of buying those, we need to do background checks. And so this is what that would look like. And then you'll see the revised budget reallocated those budgets to the correct lines. And so now in your new budget, CERT banners would be removed and you would now be able to claim background checks. And that's just the bottom part of the budget. You'll see at the bottom where it was signed and dated as well. This talks about that budget revision process again, just kind of shows you that what you'll complete, what you'll put where, and then submit that to your program manager. All right, so we're going to move on now to the invoice submission process. We've talked about you're going to be submitting your quarterly invoices. We have an online invoice submission portal. It's called Laserfish. You're going to include your PER invoice form and all of your supporting documentation as one PDF form on the 15th of the month after the end of each quarter. Again, there is a slide that gives you those dates, so make sure you refer to that. Again, this is cost reimbursement, so you only include expenses that are paid in that quarter. Go back to those examples we talked about. Make sure you're signing and dating that PER form. And then per the contract, Volunteer Florida has 40 days from the receipt of a correct and complete invoice to provide payment. So if you've provided a PER form that's filled out correctly, the calculations are correct, you've signed and dated it, and you have all the proper supporting documentation, you will receive a review and your payment within 40 days. If we have to come back and request documentation or other information regarding your claim, this will slow that down and delay your payment getting out. So again, just kind of go how the process, once it is received here, our staff reviews it. If everything is in line and ready to go, then it's immediately sent to the payment stage and payment is done. If we've got to request other documentation or calculation errors, things like that, you will receive a notification directly from the Laserfish system requesting what those invoice revisions or information is, and you will have 5 business days to respond back to us. If within that 5 business day window we do not receive a response for you, our financial analyst will revise the invoice that was submitted and remove what they were not able to approve, and they will process the invoice based on what we could deem allowable. Again, I noted in the beginning, if there was something that you were unable to provide documentation for at the time, or if you paid for it within a different quarter and it could not be claimed on a Q1 invoice and we removed it, you can submit that on another invoice, or you can submit it on that final invoice at the end of the year, providing that you do have the proper supporting documentation for it. So for us to be able to stay within that 40-day window, we just we ask you to make sure that you are checking your emails. Once you provide a submission to us, if we got to provide clarification to you, the Laserfish system will send an email to the submitter. So as we talk about Laserfish, you'll know what I'm talking about there. But when you submit the invoice, you're going to provide a contact person's name and email address. The system will use that email address to provide any clarifications to. So once that clarification is sent out, we give 5 business days. If after 5 business days we don't hear from you, then those expenses will be removed and you will not receive payment. If they are match expenditures, you will not be able to report those on that invoice either. So you will we just want to make sure that you're aware of that and that you have 5 days from when you receive that to provide that information to us. Document, 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 of course. I mean, a lot of this information has to do with documentation. You cannot receive any of your reimbursable expenses, and you cannot report match without the correct documentation. So I say this in all of my trainings. Remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So making sure that you're providing as much documentation as you can to us. Again, highlight, underline, circle, make notes, let us know anything that you can give us to help aid us in that review, to get your invoice processed timely and get those funds out to you, is most helpful. So the more documentation, the better. All right, so before I move on to Laserfish, I just want to check real quick to see, did anybody have any questions? You see, there's a lot going on here, so let me take a moment. All right. Are the dates and years on this slide correct? Match requirement. Okay, so the dates, I did notice there were a couple, and I'll get those fixed before we send this out to you. The dates of the contract are July 1, 2026 to May 31st, 2027. Match requirements are 100% as per your approved budgets. And the volunteer hours, right now, the current amount that can be claimed is $34.88 per hour.
Tracy, I think I've been answering a lot of the
I
questions
see.
as we
Yeah,
go
I
through.
see. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you've got that about the timesheet. If you want to add a new budget, yep. If you want to add a new item to your budget, you have to do a budget revision. Yep, Laserfish portal is separate. We're going to go onto that in just a moment. Perfect. And thank you, Robin, for helping me out with that. All right, so we'll just keep moving. We're almost there. So, all right, this is Laserfish. So again, Laserfish is an online invoice submission portal. It allows us to be paperless, and is a gem. It's very easy to use. But again, like any other type of website, if you experience any issues, please reach out to us immediately so that we can get those resolved, so that we do not have any delays in allowing you to upload your invoices or for us to process them. Laserfish has two separate portals, and you'll see that in this presentation. The first portal is what we're going to call the original submission portal. This is where you will submit your original submission each quarter. The address is provided here for you. I would suggest that you save that as a favorite, since you'll be referring to it often. Also, you will receive emails from the Laserfish portal as well. So making sure that you check your spam or junk mail folder for those when they come in. They will actually come from a web address that says volunteerfl at mcci.io. Kind of a little weird, so I wanted to make sure I mentioned it. So if you see those emails come in, those are coming directly from our site and are most likely a budget or a clarification on your invoice from us. When you go to the original submission portal, you'll see the top say Volunteer Florida Subgrantee Portal. You will choose everything that is got a red asterisk will be required. Okay, so your funding source, you will choose the Community Emergency Response Team funding source. The drop down for PER quarter, you're going to choose the quarter in which you're submitting for. So if it's quarter one, it's quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, quarter four. And then there's also one in here for final. So if it's your final invoice at the end of the grant year, you would choose final. PER year, for everything that you'll submit for this year, you're going to choose 2026, 2027 as that PER year. Subgrantee organization. Each of you will be listed in the subgrantee organization dropdown as noted on the W-9 that you've provided. So whatever legal name that is being provided on your W-9 is how you will be referred to in the subgrantee organization dropdown menu. If any of you have both a Citizens Core and a CERT grant with us, you will be listed twice in the organization dropdown, and you will have an identifier. So one will say CERT and the other will say either CC or Citizens Core. There are some maximum characters that I can put in there. So depending on how your name is in your W-9, but they will be distinguished. So if you have a CERT and a Citizen Core grant, you're going to be submitting two separate invoices, and you'll want to make sure you're choosing the correct organization name from the drop down for each of those invoices. Moving on to supporting documentation. You can either click on the upload button and browse your folders to attach your submission, or you can drag and drop those documents directly in the website in the upload area. Once that is all completed and you've attached your submission, you're going to put the submitter information. Again, the submitter is who we and the system will communicate with regarding the invoice. So if there are any clarifications or requests that need to be made, an invoice will be sent to whoever submits the invoice. So make sure you're including the information for that person that you wish to be contacted in that instance. First name, last name, email, and phone number. Once all that information is provided, you'll click on the submit button. Once you click on submit, the screen should give you a notification that your invoice has been submitted. If you do not receive that, then you need to reach out to us, because most likely if you did not receive a notification, that means we most likely did not receive the invoice either. So either A, try it again, and if you still are not getting a notification, then please reach out to us. All right, this next step, it goes through exactly what I talked about when you go to the website, and then again, the submitter's information. Once you get that thing on the screen saying you submitted it, you will also get an email. And this right here is a sample email that you will receive from the subgrantee portal submission. It's going to say, thank you for submitting your PER for, and it's going to include whatever quarter and grant year you provided. It's also going to assign you what we call an instance ID number that is going to be in this email. You'll want to hold on to that because that's going to come in handy if you have been requested to provide other documentation or information. So make sure you're holding on to these. So one, making sure you're receiving a notification that it has been submitted. And then two, make sure you hold on to this email. Again, that email address that these emails are going to come from are the Volunteer Florida at mccicloud.io. All right, if your invoice requires further clarification or documentation, you will receive this email. It's going to say, thank you, we've reviewed it, and we have the following comments or requests. And then it's going to list out information that we need. It's going to tell you that you have 5 business days to submit that back to us. It's letting you know that if we do not receive by that date, that we will remove them and process the invoice. It's going to also give you, you may submit the update by clicking here. So that's one way to, that is one way to get to our update portal. It's also going to show you the instance ID number again. The update portal is requires the instance ID, so it's also going to give you that in this email. Once you click that link, it's going to take you to our update portal. This slide right here also gives you the web address for the update portal. Again, this is the portal you will use if you've already submitted and we've requested additional information. You'll go to this portal. This is what that's going to look like. And at the top of the screen, it's going to specifically tell you that it is the subgrantee update portal. Okay. The instance ID is going to be required. Again, everything in red is required. So here, the instance ID from our email said 78. So you're going to enter that. And then you're going to choose the same funding source, quarter, and year that you originally chose. Your subgrantee organization name, the email that was used for submission. And then you're going to, again, upload those corrected documents. You will hit submit. In this instance, you will get a notification on the screen that it's been submitted. You will not get a separate email the second time around. You will get a notification on the screen. So again, if you do not get that notification or the email that said thank you for your submission, it most likely means we did not receive it. So please reach out to us, and then that way we can work through and figure out what may be happening. Right, and this is step by step of what I just talked you through. Same thing there. So as you can tell, the Laserfish system is very user friendly. It's very easy to use. Everyone within your organization, it is not a password and username based system. It is a web based system. So anyone within the organization can submit on your behalf. Just make sure again that you're including the submitter information for the person that you request. Or that you would like us to reach out to in case there are any clarifications needed or other documentation needed. Okay. All right. So this last slide, it just kind of gives information for Nicholas and I. If you ever have any questions, again, if you're unsure if your documentation meets the requirements, you have a question whether something's allowable or not, you need assistance with completing your monthly PER form or that budget revision, please do not hesitate to reach out to either one of us. We're always here to help you. We want to make you successful. We want to get this funding out to our communities. So again, I know that was a lot of information. This will all be provided to you by the end of the week, along with any other questions. So I appreciate you joining me today. Are there any final questions to be answered, or are we good to go?
Tracy, there was a question from Annalie on the paper check reimbursement purposes. Do you prefer that request be put on a letterhead, or just have the authorized signature?
Yeah, it should be a letter from the organization on their letterhead with an authorized signature requesting us. Um, just to note that we try to make sure that everybody gets electronic payments. That's the quickest, fastest way to receive those. So if you're able to do that, please do that. But if you absolutely must, wish to only receive a paper check, then yeah, please let that be a letter on your letterhead requesting that with an authorized signature. All right. Any other questions? Any other information? All right. Well, that's all I have for you today. I appreciate you guys joining me. As always, we're here to help you. So please reach out. Thank you.